I have been challenged recently by the thought that I have made my world too horizontal. No, I know about Columbus and Galileo and the fact that we've got a round earth. But theologians and preachers use the phrase a horizontal worldview when they talk about our life being focused on just the relationships that you and I, that we human beings have together. What the challenge is to also think about God and those things that are divine and otherworldly, which, if you were looking at this as a graph, that would be the vertical axis. Now, even though I am vehemently opposed to a hierarchical view of all things divine, I think we have allowed people in power to get away with an awful lot by allowing their God to be above us and looking down on us. But with that caveat, I still think the challenge is a good one. Do we spend too much of our time, particularly in our God talk, our theology, talking about how we work together, and not enough about how God works with us or challenges us? And I'm well aware that spending 40 days talking about community every Sunday and every day in between probably helped us think on the horizontal plane a little bit too much. It's very easy to focus and perfectly understandable to focus on the me-you relationship as opposed to the I-thou relationship, the God relationship. Because, let's be honest, even with all the wonderful words we have in the Bible, even with all the great experiences of great theologians and martyrs and prophets, God is ultimately unknowable. So we spend a lot of time on the horizontal plane. In an article I read recently in the Christian Century, a New Zealand theologian named Christopher Holmes confronted my horizontal worldview in a very daring way. He took on one of my favorite images, and I would suspect many of yours. How many of you have said that those of us who are people of faith, especially those of us who are Christians, are the very hands and feet of Jesus? I've probably said it dozens of times. I add, we're the heart of Jesus. Well, he challenges us because he says that domesticates Jesus an awful lot. That makes Jesus really, whatever you can do, that's as far as Jesus can go. Whoever you can touch, you can hug, whoever you can have an effect upon, it makes Jesus and therefore God mighty small. He also challenges me because I use incarnation theology, incarnation language, that we are the embodiment, we are the incarnate, living Jesus. He says that really makes God very, very small. I mean, I love all of you very much, and you're beautiful and great and wonderful and all that, but you ain't Jesus. I think I know Jesus, and I ain't Jesus. There's a few people who are really close to being Jesus over there in the peanut gallery, but not quite. Essentially, by using this horizontal image of God, or this embodiment image of Jesus, we domesticate Him, we domesticate God, and really make God and Jesus a puppet, doing our will. And hopefully we're doing a lot of wonderful things, but really, it's very limiting. Jesus and God should never be treated just as one who could be controlled, or, even here in worship, as one who is just remembered. See, that's where he starts meddling with my mind, because he says that we Christians have this kind of horizontal theology, and put God on our plane, and God is our hands and our feet, and then we come into our worship service, and that's what we end up worshiping. Now, it's not that all those good deeds that we do are bad and wrong, but they limit God. And what he says is, especially for those of us who come to a table every single week, we therefore put God and Jesus into the past. It's all about remembering what Jesus did, recalling the acts of God in history, reflecting upon where we knew God in the past. And that worship kind of becomes this love fest of a dead God. As I thought about this challenge to my theology, it made me want to think and explore about worship, about this hour and a half, all the more. So I asked myself some questions, and maybe you can ask yourself these questions too. Do I worship as if I'm trying to recall an ancient prophet and try to live like he lived? Or do I worship as if I'm trying to become more and more aware of a living presence in our midst? Do we as disciples of Christ, we're very proud to be people of the table, do we do a disservice to Jesus by not being more insistent that Holy Communion is not a meal of remembrance, but an active invitation to the table at which Jesus Christ is host in this very moment? In the last few minutes, did you, like I, spend most of my time trying to think about a Jesus in an upper room with 12 disciples? Or did I try to hear what Jesus was whispering into my ear in that very moment? Now, I know we as Protestants don't believe in consubstantiation or transubstantiation, where the actual elements become the body and the blood. I know we don't. But we don't have to believe that theology or that church polity in order to feel Jesus is present. Jesus is real. Jesus is here. Do I preach talking about Scripture in such a way to give the impression to you and to whoever might walk through our doors that the Bible is this historical document that needs to be examined just like the Magna Carta or Wuthering Heights? Or do we open the Bible expecting the ink to be wet because it was just written for us? Do we open the Bible in worship, reading it as if Jesus had just said those words to us? As if God, through Moses or Miriam or David or Isaiah, were literally writing to us in this very moment. The ink is not dry. Holmes reminds us that it was no less than the great 20th century pastor and prophet Dietrich Bonhoeffer who stressed in his works that Jesus Christ is a reality. No, actually, he didn't say a reality. He said Jesus Christ is reality. As reality, Jesus is at work now in our midst, and especially in worship. Should be no greater place should Jesus be reality than in this very moment. Jesus is at work now in our midst. Do you feel him? Do you hear him? Did he brush next to you? Especially in worship, Jesus is inviting us in. Jesus is confronting our comfort zones. Jesus is healing us and comforting us. Jesus is empowering us and sending us forth. It isn't the elder at the table. It isn't the soloist. It's certainly not the preacher. If worship is to be authentic, it needs to be none other than Jesus Christ. So how do we worship as if Jesus were present? How do we get that feeling as if Jesus is in the room? Well, we do what is the hardest act a human being can do, at least in my humble estimation. It's that act of letting go. It's that act of releasing our need to be in control. The phrase, let go and let God, has been overused, I know, but it holds a core truth about worship. Now, by letting go, I'm not talking about throwing up our hands in disgust or frustration. Sometimes worship causes us to want to do that too, right? I'm not calling us to a disengagement from proper planning and preparation for worship. It takes a lot to make this happen. I know there is such a thing as spontaneous worship, and I'm glad for that. Worship that kind of comes from the spirit of the moment. I let the Holy Spirit work through my planning and preparation the week before, as I'm sure all of us who are in worship do. I'm really talking about something deeper, something more spiritual, if you will. In life and worship especially, in order to fully experience Christ as a present reality, we must open ourselves to who God is and what God is calling to us in that moment. Letting go is one of the hardest things we human beings do. So I tried to think to myself, what would be a good image to give you? So I came up with a funny anecdote. Several years ago, I purchased one of those sun reflectors. You know, that you put in the window of the car. I remember Norma Stearns had a particularly lively one she would put in her car. You know, that you stretch it out in the summertime and you'd put it in your front dashboard and you fold down the visors or the sun visors in order to hold it in place. Now, I came from the Southwest, from New Mexico, and I believe that these reflectors are as important to go out on the road with as our jumper cables and an ice scraper. Believe me, it gets so hot, almost impossible to hold on to your steering wheel if you don't have one of those. Now, I had the cardboard kind, you know, that folds out, but those get a little messy, especially if I spill my coffee on them, which I was prone to do. So I bought a new one. I bought this one. A nice little circle. It did not look anything at all like the sun visors or the sun reflectors I had before. But the store clerk told me that they were the best. Absolutely the best. This flexible fabric in this circle. So the store clerk said, all you have to do is just pull on it and it pops open. There we go. They were right. Oh, sorry. And it was very easy to put into the windows. I use this all the time. It was true, I loved it, except for the fact that once I was done, there were no instructions for folding this thing. For putting it back into a way that you can. It would have made for a great routine the first time I tried this. Because I kept thinking about it. I thought about it a lot. Now, if I were a thing, what would I do? If I had springy, it did not make sense to me. I tried and tried and tried. And finally, when I was completely frustrated and ready to throw it to the back window, I just, on a whim, tried something different. Now, it's not going to work for me now because I'm thinking about it. That's the whole point. Anyway, something like that. This happens every time I open this up. Because every time I open it up, I then think I know how to do it. And the next time to close it, I think I know exactly how to. You just saw me. I didn't remember how to do it, even though I've done this hundreds of times. As smart and as capable as I am, as thoughtful as I am, at that moment, the only way for me to get the darn thing to work was to let go of my need to be in control of doing it. That is exactly what we're called to in worship. Again, we don't let go of good planning and quality preparations, but when we are actually worshiping, we need to let go and let God. To let the divine be truly present and to work God's wonderful will in our lives in that moment. To let the presence of Christ be so palpable to you that you can hear his heart beating next to you, so that I can feel his breath upon my neck. I don't know what this might mean for you, but I am eager to continue in this line of thinking, because it's most especially hard for those of us who are in worship leadership to let go and let God. And I've said it more than one occasion, and it is still the truest thing for me in worship, that the only few moments that I can come close to doing this is during Scott's solo and Jim's playing. Because it is, for some reason, in that moment, I feel like others are in total control of that moment, and I can just let go. The fact that he picks some easy music is beside the point. This is what we're called to when we say we must give God our worship. It's why we come to this building as often as we possibly can, on Sunday mornings and other special occasions for worship. It is giving God our worship. If we worship in this way, we will find that the horizontal and the vertical meld together and become integrated into one whole. And in Bonhoeffer's exquisite words, worship will be a reality that wills to become real ever anew in what exists and what exists again. And isn't that the chief aim of a faithful life and of worship? To understand Jesus Christ anew and yet anew again. May it be so. May it be so. So let us now conclude our service of worship, lifting ourselves up to God. If you would